Here's your smart fact of the day. So, what's the biggest issue people have with change? Right? So, whenever they're going through any individual change or any organizational change or any kind of change, and the biggest number one factor, according to an HBR article on this subject, is a loss of control. We don't admit it, but it is certainly a loss of control that makes us behave all weird when it comes to a transition time. Welcome to Smarter with Sid, and today's episode, what we are going to explore is transition times. Transition times about careers, about projects, about changing places, and whatever it may be. How do you manage a transition time for yourself? Is there any formula? Let's explore. Let's go. The context for this one is transition times have happened to me so many times that I've lost count. I was a corporate person, then I became an entrepreneur, then I became an academic, and now I'm slowly shifting towards maybe becoming a content creator of sorts. Transitions in my career have not been, very strange to me. And it has certainly made me learn a lot of things, especially from the mistakes that I've made. But transitions are not necessarily about careers. It could very well be about a specific project that you're ending even within your career. Or it could very well be, you shifting from one college to the other, or from one university to the other, or just shifting to a new place and restarting your life, or whatever it may be. I'm trying to maybe ignore the personal aspects over here in terms of maybe changing relationships or the rest of it. I want to focus maybe on something that will get you on the go as an individual or as somebody who's, trying to make the most of life and the rest of it. So that's the context for today's episode on transitions. And first of all, at the very outset, I wanted to kind of make a distinction between change and transition, right? So change is what happens to you if externally. Sometimes it's very sudden, sometimes it's gradual, whatever it may be. Transition is what you experience internally. So essentially, if you're dealing with transitions, you're dealing with an internal state of affairs, an internal mindset, maybe your emotions, maybe your mood. Now, a lot of this has been covered at an organizational level, and a lot of it has been covered by psychologists and psychiatrists. And I don't want to tread familiar territory about how to deal with yourself as far as transitions are concerned. I mean, there is this famous model called Bridges transition model, which goes from, say, the uncertainty zone to the neutral zone, then to the new possibilities zone, or whatever it may be. And while those are useful, I personally believe that they're also limiting because they expect almost all of us to behave the same way as far as transitions are concerned. But truth be told, there are two things that are happening. One is essentially you are at a particular state of mind when you have kind of planned the transition, or maybe the transition is a forced thing upon you. And it's quite likely that the place that you're transitioning to, whether it's a job or a new project or maybe a new situation or new place that you're moving to, as in physical place, it is also holding a lot of possibilities. So it's the marriage between your mindset, your current mindset. So if you've been, like, for example, forced into a transition, you're not going to take very kindly towards whatever new is coming your way. If you have been trying to plan for it, you might feel excited about it to an extent, but you might also feel a little wary, as in, have I thought through this really well and stuff like that. So I'm sure all of us have gone through this transitionary period in our lives, and I'm sure all of us are going to face it in the future because, truth be told, I think we are all facing more transitions than, ever before, right? So these are two thoughts that I have, okay, when it comes to planning transitions. I wanted to go to first principles and I wanted to figure out how I've reached those two thoughts or two conclusions. So here it is. If I look at, what is happening to our minds when we are transitioning, whether we are going through a forced phase or whether it's a planned thing, we are, I think, emotionally so connected with it that we can't be strategic. Now, this means that we are going to perhaps, be the kind of people who will give great advice to people who ask for it because you're not emotionally connected to it. But when it comes to taking the same advice yourself, you're going to find it really difficult. One of the biggest temptations that I've found with myself and all of my failures and all of my workings through transition is that I want to set goals for myself in the new environment that I have not yet experienced without really experiencing the new environment. Now, that's a very scary thing. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm also emotionally very charged up about things. So, all of my reactions are extreme. And a combination of trying to set goals for yourself while your emotions are extreme is a recipe for disaster, because you will tend to overplan, you will tend to look at risks differently, you will look at all kinds of possibilities with a strange gleam in your eyes. The reason being is, you are not yourself. You're not calm, you're not stable, you're not like looking at things the way they should be. And one of the thoughts that I had was to first recognize it within ourselves as to, okay, I am going through a transitionary period. My emotions are going to be a bit of turmoil, and I'm also going to try and make things more certain for myself by setting goals that make meaning to me. But here goes, right? It's quite likely that your new environment throws all of your old goals out of the window. You may find that they're completely unattainable, or you might find that they're so trivial that they need not be even mentioned. Or even better still, if you have to put on a positive spin on things, it's quite possible that you look at the new environment and new thoughts and new possibilities come to mind. So, all of these things are very imminently possible, and we should remain open to it. So, what am I suggesting? Am I suggesting, oh, your emotions are absolutely in turmoil and you have no idea what the new environment's possibilities are, so just don't plan? Well, maybe, kind of, but not exactly. What I'm suggesting is, the first thing is to make sure that you're very clear about your long term plans. So, when I say long term plans, you can say, oh, what do you mean? 15 years, 20 years, 5 years? I'm saying at least a year. So, maybe after a year, especially with this transition, whether it's forced or whether it is planned, where do you hope to be? Right now, that brings a different kind of thought process to the table, because it takes you away from the immediate turmoil, but it also says, okay, so even if whatever it is, this is my sort of outcome, which is perhaps least dependent on the new environment, which is what I would like to have at the bare minimum. And hey, if things go really well, this is what I would like to have at the absolute maximum. Kind of mentally make a note of it, if not just physically write it down. That becomes incredibly empowering, because that sort of makes you understand that, all right, this is where I want to go in spite of all the uncertainty around me. Now, the second thing that you could potentially do is to look at each task that you're doing. So let's assume that you are going for an interview in the new place that you are residing, and it's a job interview, and you've like kind of hyped it up, and you've done your research and all of that. Perhaps what you need to do is remind yourself of the long term outcome, and not take the burden of that long term outcome into short term things like interviews or meeting new people or setting up your home, or I'm just taking an example. What might be more useful in this case is to say, okay, I'm going to give the best possible interview to anybody in this situation, and just focus on the steps of that. I think this is the trick that I've found. The trick is to understand where you're going, the overall direction. And so there's meaning in your life when uncertainty does hit you, when you are in the new situation. You can always anchor yourself to that meaning, but also cut yourself some slack in terms of actually planning out the minute details and just saying, okay, I'm going to do the best I can. This seems to be a step in the right direction, and remain open to possibilities. Transition times can be very tricky. They can make you a smaller person. You can change with the context. They can make you a bigger person. They can give you great possibilities. You might not even be aware of those possibilities. So I just thought that this episode should focus on maybe all of us who are going through a transition, and kind of mindset that's required. Remember, change is external, transition is internal, completely in your control. Make sure that our emotions are in control. I hope you like this episode of Smarter with Sid. Many more to come from where this one came from. And hey, if you like me and want to listen to more of me, like and subscribe to this podcast / YouTube channel or whatever it is. And hey, I'm also the traveling professor. Connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram. And if you like podcasts like these, just check out all the wonderful stuff that IVM's got for you. On that happy note then.